let's now start from the very beginning by creating our sequence. Now, there's a few different ways you can do this. If I enlarge the project panel here on Premiere, we can see that the frame rate of our footage here, mainly it's 29.97. That's the average frame rate for most smartphones. Some of them in here are slightly different frame rates. I think that's because they came from, okay, yeah, that's because they were boomerangs from Instagram. So it's going to be a different frame rate. That's not that big of a deal. And then we can also see here our resolution. See, for this scenario, I shot all this footage vertical. So yours will either likely be 1080 by 1920. That's 1080 pixels wide by 1920 pixels vertical. The standard 16 by 9 aspect ratio is the exact opposite, which is 1920 by 1080. I know that I'm going to want to do it as a vertical aspect ratio so that it'll show up on social media as the vertical format, just like the way you hold your phone vertically. So what I'm going to do is choose the video file that has the frame rate and the resolution that I know I want the rest of my sequence to be. And the reason we're doing that is because whatever sequence settings you have, when you drag in your other footage, it's going to basically adhere to those original sequence settings. Make sense? Okay. So what I'm going to do is click that video file that I want the sequence from. I'm going to right click it and I'm going to click new sequence from clip. So now what this did is two things. It brought in my video file into my new sequence and it default labeled my sequence the name of the video file that I used to create that sequence. So we want to do something here. And that thing we want to do is title this sequence, as you can see with the little symbols, that these are all video files. That's a boomerang, so it shows up as a slightly different video file icon. And this icon here is the sequence icon. Now, it's a little bit confusing just taking a glance at this. We can't really find our main sequence very quickly. So what we always want to do is title our sequence. Generally, I personally title it main sequence. You'll see why we do that. But you can title it main edit, main footage, whatever you want it to be. And now what I'm going to do is drag that sequence outside of the footage folder. And to keep things even more organized, we're going to make a sequences folder. Because as we build this out, you're going to find out that we're going to have multiple different sequences, especially the more complex your edits get. Okay, so let's go to our main sequence here. You can see we have our first video file that's dropped into our edit. Now, if we go to our footage, we're simply going to highlight the rest of our video files from our footage folder, and we're going to drag that in as well. Okay, so as you can see, like I was mentioning, some of the video files are different settings. That's why we chose the sequence. That's why we chose the file that we wanted to create the sequence settings from, but the ones that were different aren't fitting. So the next step to fix that is to highlight these files, and the easiest way to do it is to scale it to frame size. What that's just saying is you're saying that I want the computer to take the size of this other stuff that doesn't match the sequence settings. Sorry, this is confusing, but it all makes sense. Doesn't match the sequence settings. You click scale the frame size or set the frame size. Boom. That's going to automatically snap it to fit the rest of your sequence. Okay. And I'm going to kind of just skip forward ahead here and see if there's any other ones that aren't matching. And yep, we have this one here. It looks like it was shot on a different phone. So I'm going to hit scale to frame size. And I think there's one more here. And I'm going to hit scale to frame size. Now you can see that this did something interesting here. Because this is a normal horizontal aspect ratio clip here, what it did is it scaled the edges of the video to the edges of the sequence. Now that's a problem in this case because if it was rotated this way and it scaled it up, it would have fit perfectly, right? But this is shot at a different aspect ratio. So when I hit scale to frame size, it's still leaving these black bars at the bottom and the top of the screen. So in this very specific scenario, this is where you will select that clip, go up to motion, and you'll scale it up manually, as you can see. Now that we've gotten everything set up in our editing software, the next step is going to be pulling our selects. And simply put, pulling your selects is choosing the shots that are going to be in the video and taking out the shots that aren't going to be in the video. So, for example, if you have something with multiple takes, in this stage, you're going to be taking out the best version that you want and cutting out the rest. This is all about building your foundation of your edit. It's not about making the actual rough cut yet or something that's viewable or ready to be seen by friends, families, clients, whatever it is. And so there's two fundamental ways to do this. The first way is by labeling the clips in your project window or by cutting the clips in the timeline. Labeling your footage in the viewer allows for kind of more precise editing, but really keeps track of exact shots where they are by labeling them. And the second way, which is bringing everything into the timeline, which is what we've done, and then pulling selects, is a lot quicker and a lot more practical. I personally like this timeline method. It's way easier to put the clips in order, and then I use color to kind of categorize them in the timeline, which is what we're going to walk through here. And a nice little extra tip is that once we've pulled our selects, we're going to actually create a backup sequence of that timeline sequence of selects. So let's get into this process. Now, like I mentioned, the first and my least favorite way to pull selects is to double click them in your project window and kind of scrub through here and say, okay, cool. This is that crystal cave place that I was shooting at. So, okay, if we go to the part that we want to use, let's say that we want to start here. I'm going to hit I, and that's going to create an endpoint on this clip. I'm going to let it play here. Okay, I like that. And let's say I want to cut right there. I'm going to hit O, which is going to create an out point on the clip. Then the next step of this cutting method would be to click that original file and title it in your project window. So let's say Crystal Cave, and I think these are called stalactites. Wait, stalactites and stalagmites. One, huh? Yeah. Well, okay. Stalag things. Let's just say that. Okay, still, I don't know. Yeah. Now I have these labeled right here. And if we move to the next clip, okay, cool. This is that kind of boomerang that I did at sunset. So we'll say boomerang at sunset. And as you can see, if I were to go through and do this to every single clip that I want to use, I would have a kind of a more library categorized by letters version of where all my clips are. Okay. The second option, and is much more my favorite, a lot more practical, a lot more easy, is to have all this footage here in the sequence and scrub through it. And I'm going to do that same process, but it's actually going to be happening in the timeline. And your timeline is where your video takes place. So we can scrub through. Let's say I want to start at this point here. I'm going to hit C to bring up my blade tool. And I'm going to click to create a cut. Then I'm going to delete that extra footage that we're not going to use. And a little bit of a hack here is to hold Alt when you hit delete. What this is going to do is create what's called a ripple delete, which essentially is going to take out this empty space. Okay. So another way to do that is to hit delete on what we don't want, and you right click and you see how it highlights that empty space. Boom, ripple delete. So a ripple delete is essentially taking out what you don't want, but then scooting over the entire sequence to fill that empty space of what you just took out. I'm then going to scrub through, and right about there, I'm going to create another cut. And really what you're looking for here in pulling these selects is finding that good 2 to 3 second moment. Could be 10 seconds, could be 1 second. It really depends on the shot type. But there's always going to be, and as an editor, you're keeping in mind what you want the viewer to be seeing. So for any shot that you're shooting, there's always going to be a beginning and an end. And it's kind of it's a feeling that you'll have. But if I undo what we did here, this is not the best example, but it should work for what we're doing. If I hit play, you can see there's kind of an intro that's going here, not much happening. And then we start this nice vertical movement, and you see, wow, look at this cave. And then the pan and the tilt that I was doing by hand with the camera stops, and then it starts heading the other way. So to me, when I'm seeing that, I'm seeing the end of the first shot, and I'm actually seeing the beginning of a different shot. This is kind of a different shot, right? That's a totally different shot. So you kind of have in this situation and with your own footage, you'll see you have two different options for one shot, or very much one clear option, or it's going to be different for every single kind of shot, but it's very clear here that not much going on, not much going on, and then boom, as I'm tilting up, okay, that's where I want my clip to start. I play it through, it's interesting, I'm looking, there's a lot to see, and then boom, it kind of ends there and the camera starts to go a different way. If I really wanted to continue that shot, it's possible. If there was something else that was important that happened at this point, then we would keep it in. But in this phase of pulling selects, we want to really trim out what we're not going to use. So because I know this is the end of the shot, I'm going to create that cut and just kind of pan through it to make sure I'm not missing anything interesting. And then I know I'm not, so I'm going to ripple delete. And this is kind of a cool shot. We'll see if we use that. Not sure yet. This is okay, but honestly, it's not gonna really fit into the style of video that I want this to be. So that's something else that you want to keep in mind, is that as the filmer or the editor, you're gonna have a certain attachment to your own footage more than anyone else. Let's say I remember this moment. I was like, oh yeah, my friend Ava, my friend Asa, we were at the top of that mountain and it was so nice. And I want to remember that. No one else has that memory or that attachment to the footage. So if it's not adding, and if it's distracting potentially to your overall edit, you're going to want to take that out, because you want to have a neutral opinion as much as possible on what is being seen. Very clearly, this is an interesting shot to anyone who has not seen this, right? This is only interesting to me because I was there and it reminds me of my friends. But we're not making this as a friend memory type of edit. So I'm going to take out that kind of shot. And that's the kind of mindset I want you to have when you're pulling together, trying to decide what should I use, what should I not use. I'm not a huge fan of this shot, to be honest. So I'm going to go ahead and take that out. And it's a good idea to kind of keep in mind what kind of length you want your video to be and how much footage you're working with. So if I zoom all the way out here, and by the way, the little, oh man, what's this called? Slant key for Premiere shows you the whole timeline if you tap it. It's below the delete key and above the return key. I don't know, backslash, I think is what it's called. If you tap it, you see the full timeline. If you tap it again, it zooms back in. So I want to see the whole timeline, and we can see I have 5 minutes of footage that I want to fit into 1 minute of this edit. So I know that stuff that I'm iffy about, that I don't think I'm going to use, I'm just going to go ahead and take it out completely. Let's move on here to the next clip. Let it play through. Okay, perfect. So this is kind of a cool shot. And as you can see, it has what we were talking about with a beginning point of interest and an ending point of interest. Every shot that you have has a beginning and an end. So if we hit play, okay, it starts right about there. You see, it's like a pretty ocean, or it's actually a lake, and there's some movement, which is kind of nice, but it doesn't really get going until around here. So I'm gonna keep a little bit of, I like this in the bottom right. So I'm gonna cut that and start it there. And then I'm gonna end it there. Okay. And you don't want to get too into the in and out point quite just yet. Because we're doing a first kind of initial pass. But then you can start to split frames once you get into more of the refining process. But what we simply did there was trimmed out the intro that didn't need to be there. There was not much going on. And then right about, yep, there, we cut the end of the clip. So now it looks like we are back in the crystal underground place. So I'm going to scrub through here and see. That's kind of interesting there at the beginning. That's okay. I'm not too excited about that. Okay. So I do some kind of camera movement there to the ceiling, but honestly, like this one doesn't really do a whole lot for me. But just in case, I do like seeing this cool, all the reflections here in the stone. I think that's pretty unique. You don't get to see that much. So what I'm going to do is play it and start it when we don't really need to see any of this. It gets interesting right about there. So as you're going through your footage, keep this in mind of starting with the point of interest. You don't want to give your viewer anything to not look at because then it's like, well, why am I seeing this footage? Okay, and I'm going to end it about there. And I'm going to edit the rest of that out. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start to loosely organize my clips together as I'm doing this initial pass. So I'm going to highlight this second cave clip, okay? And I'm going to drag it over to the other cave clip. But what happens when I do that is that it deletes what was underneath it, okay? The way to get around that is to, when you drag, hold command when you want to drop it. And this is going to push everything else behind where you're dropping it off back. So rather than overriding and deleting what's below it, you're simply doing the opposite thing of a ripple delete, where you're creating space and pushing everything back. So now we have this cave clip, boom, and we have this next cave clip. Now, because I'm loosely categorizing these clips together, another kind of little hack is to label or color code your clips. So the way I'm going to do that is by highlighting the clips I want to change the color of or put together. And I'm going to right click, go to label, and then I'm going to be able to choose from any of these colors. That's going to really make it obvious what clips are from the same scene, the same time of day, the same location, all different types of ways to label and organize your footage. But this is a really cool way, and that you'll see once we have a whole timeline cut together. Oof, it is such a good way, especially if you're a visual person, to keep these clips organized. And so I want you to continue with me going through and pulling selects on the rest of your video footage. Okay, so I have this clip here where I'm kind of walking, pan and tilt up to the sun. And I'm not super into that shot, so I'm going to go ahead and delete. I'm going to ripple delete here as well to to get rid of the extra space here. That's kind of a cool shot. So I'm going to keep this one. And I'm going to cut it right about there because we don't need to really see this whole stone floor. But I'm going to cut here. Okay. And then I'm going to cut there. Actually, so this is a good example of other reasons to cut as an editor. So we have our shot here. Everything looks great. And right there. So if I go back, you can see that the camera, yeah, you see that? The camera was trying to pull focus on my phone. So we don't want that. We don't need that. So that's a perfect, obvious reason, a less subtle reason, a very direct reason to cut. So right before that happens, I'm going to go ahead and cut that. And by the way, in Premiere, this little squiggly line, I don't know what it's called. I'm going to put it up on screen right now. Wherever your cursor is hovering on screen, if your cursor is over here on the viewer window, if I hit the tab, it's gonna, or a squiggly line, whatever it's called, it's gonna expand. If it's here, it's gonna expand. Okay, same thing for there. So when you just want to see your program window, which is like what your final edit looks like, you know, it's a perfect way to use it. So we're on to our next shot here, and this is great. I'm going to cut out the beginning. I'm going to scrub forward here. Okay. So the shot can either end right here, and I can add a cut right there, or it can continue, and then you kind of see more of the nature. So that's a good example of two different options. The shorter shot. So this shot starts at 33 seconds, and then the main one ends at 41. So that's, if I do simple math here, that's 8 seconds. That's already plenty long for one shot. So even though this next shot has some nice nature in the background, I'm not going to use that. Okay. But what I will do is that now we have these two selected and cut, trimmed down, and they're from the same location. I'm going to highlight both. I'm going to right click and I'm going to label these. Choose your favorite color. All this stuff kind of has a yellowish vibe to me, a yellowish orange vibe. So some footage feels really bright. I choose more of a yellowish tone for labeling. Some footage is like nighttime. I choose more of a bluish tone for labeling. So this is like a lake, you know, that can be used to create that. So as you're skimming across your timeline and looking for the shots you want to use, boom, the color is key, trust me. So moving forward now, we have this waterfall here, and I believe there's 3 different shots of this. So let's let this play through. We have shot 1, this is shot number 2. And this is the 3rd shot. Okay, cool. So there's a few different practical ways to choose what shot to use if you have 3, 4 options, whatever it is. We have this one that's very cool, kind of POV of a person in nature. It gives it a little bit more context. When we just have waterfall or something that we're shooting, sometimes it's hard to feel scale. Sometimes it's hard to feel how like awe-inspiring a location can be with what we're shooting without some type of reference, without having a person in it or something else in it that gives the brain something to be like, okay, damn, that's a really cool place. That is one reason to go with to choose your shot. Another reason is like what's going on in your shot. We have the same waterfall here at different angles and at different times of day. So here, waterfalls in the distance. It's not super impactful. We see the stream. I know this is kind of like funny to be talking about waterfalls and streams, but it goes across all editing decisions and choices regardless of the footage you're using. So waterfalls in the background, it's kind of cool. And waterfall is a little bit more zoomed in here. So we have more of a close-up shot. We have a wide shot. And then we have kind of this POV shot, right? We also see that, as getting back to what I was originally saying, different times of day, different lighting, and different shot types. Now, this time of day with this lighting obviously stands out so much more. The golden stuff that's going on, like where I was when I was shooting this, is so much more interesting, impactful, tells more of a story, and gives more information to the viewer than these other 2 shots. So, boom, all those different questions you're asking yourself are going to be pointing you towards which shot to go with when you're sitting here with all this raw footage, right? So, let's delete one of these. Okay, I'm definitely not going to use the second one. I really like this one. I'm sure this is going to be the go-to. I'm going to move this in front of the other one, and I'm going to color code these. Let's just say teal, okay? Now we have this empty space that I'm going to remove by doing a ripple delete. We have a new location. So I would say that we can kind of trim off some of the excess stuff here, kind of step in, which is cool. Okay, boom. And this is another scenario when you can ask yourself, is the whole clip really needed? This clip is starting at 54 seconds and ending at 106. Math. That's 12 seconds. Okay, we're probably not going to use 12 seconds of this clip. So here's another opportunity with the footage that you're editing to have a long form. Okay, I might use that whole thing, or just simply trim out where the shot is likely to end. To me, we're tilting up, seeing the water, seeing the view, and we can cut there versus starting kind of a brand new shot where now you're looking at a different scenery, even though it's the same shot. You're starting a second shot, which we don't need.